What if the last man Australia ever executed wasn't guilty? Welcome to Red Dossier, where we uncover the darkest true crime stories history tried to bury. Today, we're digging into the case of Ronald Ryan, a man hanged for murder, even though no one saw him pull the trigger. The evidence disputed. The witnesses conflicted. The sentence, death. So why did the government rush the execution? And what really happened behind those prison walls? Stay with us. The boy didn't cry the first time they took him away. The home was quiet when the car pulled up, its engine humming against the stillness. A woman in a gray coat stood by the gate, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Inside, the child was told to pack a small bag, just the essentials. He didn't ask questions. He had already learned that questions led nowhere. Ronald Ryan was only 12 when the state claimed him. His mother was gone. His father, a stranger more than a parent, had vanished years before. No siblings, no anchor. Only silence. The foster system swallowed him whole. By 16, he had lived in 7 institutions. Cold dormitories, shared clothes, food rations measured in strict silence. Authority came in the form of locked doors and shouted instructions. There was no affection, no warmth. Only a constant, lingering sense that he did not belong, not to anyone, not anywhere. That kind of loneliness doesn't scream. It calcifies, it turns inward and grows sharp, and for Ronald, it became the foundation of every choice that followed. He didn't start out violent. His early crimes were quiet ones: petty theft, joyrides, the occasional break-in to feel the adrenaline of entering a world that wasn't his. He told himself it wasn't about the money, it was about the control. For once he decided when to leave, when to stay. He was behind the wheel. But society doesn't make room for those. It deems unworthy. Arrests came quickly. Judges rarely asked about background. They only looked at records, and Ryan's was already stained before he turned 20. He entered prison like a man stepping into an old room, familiar, oppressive, predictable. It was a system that expected him to return. And he did. Over and over. By the early 1960s, Ryan had become both hardened and invisible. A man who spoke little, observed much, and trusted no one. But even in that hardened state, something still flickered beneath the surface, a need to prove he was more than what the files said. He met Peter Walker during a stint in Pentridge Prison. Walker was younger, leaner, full of restless energy, a man born into chaos and raised by consequences. Where Ryan calculated, Walker reacted, but there was something in the way they watched each other. Not friendship, not even loyalty. It was recognition. They had both been forgotten. Prison life had rhythms. Alarms, counts, yard time, silence. But between those beats, they talked, mostly in code, sometimes in whispers. They spoke about the wall, about the guards, about how no one had escaped in years. It wasn't fantasy, it was planning. Each day added another line to the map. Ryan wasn't reckless, he was precise, every route timed, every shadow calculated. The escape wasn't just a chance to flee confinement, it was a statement. One final act of rebellion in a life defined by submission. And Walker, he needed no convincing. He was a fuse looking for flame. On December 19, 1965, the routine broke. It started like any other day. The guard rotation shifted, the prisoners lined up, then Ryan and Walker vanished from formation. The stolen rifle had been smuggled in, hidden, passed from one set of hands to another until it landed in Ryan's grip. They moved fast, too fast for the guards to react. They didn't run far at first, just far enough to breathe. The city spread out beneath them like a map of consequences. Ronald Ryan and Peter Walker moved quickly, not with panic, but with purpose. Each alley, each street corner, each decision came from the plan that had been living in Ryan's head for months. The escape had always been about reclaiming control, but now the stakes had changed. A man was down a guard, blood on the prison pavement. And though no one had seen the shooter, the sound of that single shot followed them like a shadow. Ryan said nothing. Walker's face was tight, unreadable. They didn't speak about the gun, they didn't need to. Both men knew the city had just shifted against them. Within hours, the story hit the papers. 2 prisoners on the run, armed, dangerous. 1 officer killed during the escape. Headlines didn't wait for trials, they wrote guilt in bold ink. They hid in sheds and underpasses, slipped through industrial yards, stole clothes from washing lines, bread from back doors. For Ryan, every decision was survival by logic. Don't linger. Don't be seen. Don't trust. He moved like a man rehearsing a dance he never wanted to perform. For Walker, it was different. The pressure built in bursts. He paced. He snapped at small noises. He smoked with shaking hands. His rage simmered. Not because he wanted to be caught, but because the chaos made him feel alive. Two fugitives bound by a crime, neither could undo. They made it out of the city within days, crossed into quiet suburbs, then to the open edges of Victoria. For a while, the countryside gave them silence. No sirens, no questions, just wind and dirt and the hum of a stolen car. But freedom was a shrinking thing. Food ran low, sleep turned light. They no longer moved as partners, but as two men orbiting the same fear. At night, Ryan kept his back to the wall, the rifle beside him. Walker talked about what came next: rob a store, take a boat, disappear into the bush. Ryan didn't answer. He knew the truth. This wasn't escape. It was a delay. Time borrowed from a system that never forgave. Then came the first mistake. A woman recognized them outside a grocery in Ballarat. She didn't scream. She didn't run, but her eyes paused too long. That pause was enough. By the next morning, police had the lead. Roadblocks, helicopters, plainclothes officers in town. The net was tightening. They fled again. Deeper into the countryside. Into motels, barns, and finally into the backyard of a stranger. It was there in a quiet Melbourne suburb that it ended. They had taken shelter in a small home, while the owners were away. Food from the fridge, blankets on the floor. A brief illusion of safety, but Ryan made one call, a single call to a friend for help, one that was already being traced. At 7:45 p.m., the police came. The house surrounded, orders shouted. Walker ran to the back door. Ryan hesitated. The rifle in his hands felt heavier now. Not with guilt, with finality. He opened the door and stepped into the light. No resistance, no shots. Just surrender. The papers celebrated 2 criminals captured. A dead guard avenged. The system reaffirmed. But inside the cell, Ryan sat with the same silence he had carried since childhood. He didn't confess. He didn't protest. When asked about the shooting, he simply said, "It wasn't me." The trial moved fast. The escape, the armed robbery, the stolen rifle, all undeniable, but the killing remained unclear. Ballistics were inconclusive. No fingerprint on the trigger, no witness saw the exact moment of the shot. Walker refused to testify against him. Still, the walls of Pentridge Prison stood like sentinels, gray and still, casting long shadows over the exercise yard. Within them, Ronald Ryan waited. The trial was over. The verdict delivered. Death by hanging. There were no appeals left, no mercy coming. Only time ticking forward with the weight of finality. He didn't spend his last days screaming. There were no outbursts, no dramatic refusals. Instead, there was quiet, writing, thinking, staring through the small slot of sky above his cell. The press called him a killer. The court called him guilty. But in that narrow space between the sentence and the noose, he held on to a single truth: he hadn't pulled the trigger. Letters poured in from across the country. Teachers, priests, lawyers, mothers, ordinary people who saw more than a crime. They saw the doubt, they saw the man, and they questioned the system that demanded his death without certainty. Protests formed at the prison gates. Thousands marched through Melbourne. Streets' placards rose like fists. Not in our name, no rope for doubt. But inside the walls the machinery of execution moved forward unshaken. Ryan spent hours writing to his daughters. He chose every word with care. Not to explain the past, but to leave them something beyond shame, something to hold. He told them he was sorry for the years he had lost, for the silence, for the weight they had to carry. But he asked them not to hate the world. He asked them to remember him as more than what the papers printed. On February 3, 1967, before dawn, the prison stirred. A small team of officials assembled in the cold hallway outside his cell. The chaplain offered prayer. Ryan declined. Instead he asked for a moment alone. When they entered, he stood ready. Dressed. Calm. Eyes steady. He said nothing as the guards led him through the corridor. No plea. No final statement. Just the sound of boots on stone and breath held between footsteps. The gallows waited behind a heavy door. The same gallows that had taken dozens before him, but this time, the weight was different. It wasn't just a man being led to die. It was a question carried on his shoulders. The hood was placed, the rope tightened. No one spoke. The executioner stepped back. At 8 a.m., the trapdoor fell. Outside, the crowd stood silent. Some wept, some stood frozen, others screamed through tears, fists raised toward a sky that refused to answer. In the days that followed, the government insisted it had upheld justice, but the public was no longer convinced. The protests didn't fade, they grew. The outrage echoed through homes and classrooms, courtrooms and parliaments. The newspapers shifted tone. The editorials demanded change. And slowly something cracked. The death penalty was suspended, then abolished. Ronald Ryan's execution became the last in Australian history. But the doubt remained. Some said justice was done, that rules must be enforced, that order must be defended. Others said, something had been lost that day, not just a man, but a piece of the nation's conscience, not for what was done, but for what couldn't be undone. The story of Ronald Ryan does not end with the drop of the rope. It lingers in books, in law, in the way Australians speak about guilt and punishment. His name is remembered not for how he lived, but for how he died. And in that there is a deeper question. When the system